Chapter 17. Before 2 o'clock in the afternoon the Rostovs' 4 carriages, packed full and with the horses harnessed, stood at the front door. One by one the carts with the wounded had moved out of the yard. The caleche in which Prince Andrew was being taken attracted Sonia's attention as it passed the front porch. With the help of a maid she was arranging a seat for the countess in the huge high coach that stood at the entrance. "Whose caleche is that?" she inquired, leaning out of the carriage window. "Why, didn't you know, miss?" replied the maid. "The wounded prince, he spent the night in our house and is going with us." "But who is it? What's his name?" "It's our intended, that was, Prince Bolkonsky himself." "They say he is dying," replied the maid with a sigh. Sonia jumped out of the coach and ran to the countess. The countess, tired out and already dressed in shawl and bonnet for her journey, was pacing up and down the drawing-room, waiting for the household to assemble for the usual silent prayer with closed doors before starting. Natasha was not in the room. "Mama," said Sonia, "Prince Andrew is here, mortally wounded. He is going with us." The countess opened her eyes in dismay and, seizing Sonia's arm, glanced around. "Natasha," she murmured. At that moment this news had only one significance for both of them. They knew their Natasha, and alarm as to what would happen if she heard this news stifled all sympathy for the man they both liked. "Natasha does not know yet, but he is going with us," said Sonia. "You say he is dying?" Sonia nodded. The countess put her arms around Sonia and began to cry. The ways of God are past finding out, she thought, feeling that the almighty hand, hitherto unseen, was becoming manifest in all that was now taking place. "Well, Mama? Everything is ready." "What's the matter?" asked Natasha, as with animated face she ran into the room. "Nothing," answered the countess. "If everything is ready let us start." And the countess bent over her reticule to hide her agitated face. Sonia embraced Natasha and kissed her. Natasha looked at her inquiringly. "What is it? What has happened?" "Nothing." "No. Is it something very bad for me?" "What is it?" persisted Natasha with her quick intuition. Sonia sighed and made no reply. The Count, Petya, Madame Schoss, Mavra Kuzminikna, and Vasilik came into the drawing-room and, having closed the doors, they all sat down and remained for some moments silently seated without looking at one another. The Count was the first to rise, and with a loud sigh crossed himself before the icon. All the others did the same. Then the Count embraced Mavra Kuzminikna and Vasilik, who were to remain in Moscow, and while they caught at his hand and kissed his shoulder he patted their backs lightly with some vaguely affectionate and comforting words. The Countess went into the oratory and there Sonia found her on her knees before the icons that had been left here and there hanging on the wall. The most precious ones, with which some family tradition was connected, were being taken with them. In the porch and in the yard the men whom Petya had armed with swords and daggers, with trousers tucked inside their high boots and with belts and girdles tightened, were taking leave of those remaining behind. As is always the case at a departure, much had been forgotten or put in the wrong place, and for a long time 2 menservants stood one on each side of the open door and the carriage steps waiting to help the countess in, while maids rushed with cushions and bundles from the house to the carriages, the caleche, the phaeton, and back again. "They always will forget everything," said the countess. "Don't you know I can't sit like that?" And Dunyasha, with clenched teeth, without replying but with an aggrieved look on her face, hastily got into the coach to rearrange the seat. "Oh, those servants," said the Count, swaying his head. Efim, the old coachman, who was the only one the Countess trusted to drive her, sat perched up high on the box and did not so much as glance round at what was going on behind him. From 30 years' experience he knew it would be some time yet before the order, "Be off, in God's name," would be given him, and he knew that even when it was said he would be stopped once or twice more while they sent back to fetch something that had been forgotten, and even after that he would again be stopped and the Countess herself would lean out of the window and beg him for the love of heaven to drive carefully down the hill. He knew all this and therefore waited calmly for what would happen, with more patience than the horses, especially the near one, the chestnut falcon, who was pawing the ground and champing his bit. At last all were seated, the carriage steps were folded and pulled up, the door was shut, somebody was sent for a traveling case, and the countess leaned out and said what she had to say. Then Efim deliberately doffed his hat and began crossing himself. The postilion and all the other servants did the same. "Off, in God's name," said Efim, putting on his hat. "Start." The postilion started the horses, the off-pole horse tugged at his collar, the high springs creaked, and the body of the coach swayed. The footman sprang onto the box of the moving coach which jolted as it passed out of the yard onto the uneven roadway, the other vehicles jolted in their turn, and the procession of carriages moved up the street. In the carriages, the caleche, and the phaeton, all crossed themselves as they passed the church opposite the house. Those who were to remain in Moscow walked on either side of the vehicles seeing the travelers off. Rarely had Natasha experienced so joyful a feeling as now, sitting in the carriage beside the countess and gazing at the slowly receding walls of forsaken, agitated Moscow. Occasionally she leaned out of the carriage window and looked back and then forward at the long train of wounded in front of them. Almost at the head of the line she could see the raised hood of Prince Andrew's caleche. She did not know who was in it, but each time she looked at the procession her eyes sought that caleche. She knew it was right in front. In Kadrino, from the Nikitsky, Presnya, and Podnovinsk streets came several other trains of vehicles similar to the Rostovs, and as they passed along the Sadovaya street the carriages and carts formed 2 rows abreast. As they were going round the Succor of Water Tower Natasha, who was inquisitively and alertly scrutinizing the people driving or walking past, suddenly cried out in joyful surprise. "Dear me! Mama, Sonia, look, it's he." "Who? Who?" "Look." "Yes, on my word, it's Bezukov," said Natasha, putting her head out of the carriage and staring at a tall, stout man in a coachman's long coat, who from his manner of walking and moving was evidently a gentleman in disguise, and who was passing under the arch of the Succor of Tower accompanied by a small, sallow-faced, beardless old man in a frieze coat. "Yes, it really is Bezukov in a coachman's coat, with a queer-looking old boy." "Really," said Natasha, "look, look." "No, it's not he." "How can you talk such nonsense?" "Mama," screamed Natasha, "I'll stake my head it's he. I assure you." "Stop, stop," she cried to the coachman. But the coachman could not stop, for from the Meshchansky street came more carts and carriages, and the Rostovs were being shouted at to move on and not block the way. In fact, however, though now much farther off than before, the Rostovs all saw Pierre, or someone extraordinarily like him, in a coachman's coat, going down the street with head bent and a serious face beside a small, beardless old man who looked like a footman. That old man noticed a face thrust out of the carriage window gazing at them, and respectfully touching Pierre's elbow said something to him and pointed to the carriage. Pierre, evidently engrossed in thought, could not at first understand him. At length when he had understood and looked in the direction the old man indicated, he recognized Natasha, and following his first impulse stepped instantly and rapidly toward the coach. But having taken a dozen steps he seemed to remember something and stopped. Natasha's face, leaning out of the window, beamed with quizzical kindliness. "Peter Kirillovitch, come here. We have recognized you." "This is wonderful," she cried, holding out her hand to him. "What are you doing? Why are you like this?" Pierre took her outstretched hand and kissed it awkwardly as he walked along beside her while the coach still moved on. "What is the matter, Count?" asked the countess in a surprised and commiserating tone. "What? What? Why?" "Don't ask me," said Pierre, and looked round at Natasha whose radiant, happy expression, of which he was conscious without looking at her, filled him with enchantment. "Are you remaining in Moscow, then?" Pierre hesitated. "In Moscow," he said in a questioning tone. "Yes, in Moscow. Goodbye." "Ah, if only I were a man. I'd certainly stay with you." "How splendid," said Natasha. "Mama, if you'll let me, I'll stay." Pierre glanced absently at Natasha and was about to say something, but the countess interrupted him. "You were at the battle, we heard." "Yes, I was," Pierre answered. There will be another battle tomorrow, he began, but Natasha interrupted him. But what is the matter with you, Count? You are not like yourself. Oh, don't ask me, don't ask me. I don't know myself. Tomorrow. But no. Goodbye, goodbye, he muttered. It's an awful time, and dropping behind the carriage he stepped onto the pavement. Natasha continued to lean out of the window for a long time, beaming at him with her kindly, slightly quizzical, happy smile. Chapter 18. For the last 2 days, ever since leaving home, Pierre had been living in the empty house of his deceased benefactor, Bazdiv. This is how it happened. When he woke up on the morning after his return to Moscow and his interview with Count Rostophin, he could not for some time make out where he was and what was expected of him. When he was informed that among others awaiting him in his reception room there was a Frenchman who had brought a letter from his wife, the Countess Helene, he felt suddenly overcome by that sense of confusion and hopelessness to which he was apt to succumb. He felt that everything was now at an end, all was in confusion and crumbling to pieces, that nobody was right or wrong, the future held nothing, and there was no escape from this position. Smiling unnaturally and muttering to himself, he first sat down on the sofa in an attitude of despair, then rose, went to the door of the reception room and peeped through the crack, returned flourishing his arms, and took up a book. His majordomo came in a second time to say that the Frenchman who had brought the letter from the Countess was very anxious to see him if only for a minute, and that someone from Bazdiv's widow had called to ask Pierre to take charge of her husband's books, as she herself was leaving for the country. Oh, yes, in a minute, wait, or no. No, of course, go and say I will come directly, Pierre replied to the majordomo. But as soon as the man had left the room Pierre took up his hat which was lying on the table and went out of his study by the other door. There was no one in the passage. He went along the whole length of this passage to the stairs and, frowning and rubbing his forehead with both hands, went down as far as the first landing. The hall porter was standing at the front door. From the landing where Pierre stood there was a second staircase leading to the back entrance. He went down that staircase and out into the yard. No one had seen him. But there were some carriages waiting, and as soon as Pierre stepped out of the gate the coachman and the yard porter noticed him and raised their caps to him. When he felt he was being looked at he behaved like an ostrich which hides its head in a bush in order not to be seen, he hung his head and quickening his pace went down the street. Of all the affairs awaiting Pierre that day the sorting of Joseph Bazdiv's books and papers appeared to him the most necessary. He hired the first cab he met and told the driver to go to the Patriarch's Ponds, where the widow Bazdiv's house was. Continually turning round to look at the rows of loaded carts that were making their way from all sides out of Moscow, and balancing his bulky body so as not to slip out of the ramshackle old vehicle, Pierre, experiencing the joyful feeling of a boy escaping from school, began to talk to his driver. The man told him that arms were being distributed today at the Kremlin and that tomorrow everyone would be sent out beyond the Three Hills gates and a great battle would be fought there. Having reached the Patriarch's Ponds Pierre found the Bazdiv's house, where he had not been for a long time past. He went up to the gate. Gerasim, that sallow beardless old man Pierre had seen at Torzhok 5 years before with Joseph Bazdiv, came out in answer to his knock. At home? Asked Pierre. Owing to the present state of things Sofia Danilovna has gone to the Torzhok estate with the children, Your Excellency. I will come in all the same, I have to look through the books, said Pierre. Be so good as to step in. Makar Alexievich, the brother of my late master, may the kingdom of heaven be his, has remained here, but he is in a weak state as you know, said the old servant. Pierre knew that Makar Alexievich was Joseph Bazdiv's half-insane brother and a hard drinker. Yes, yes, I know. Let us go in, said Pierre and entered the house. A tall, bald-headed old man with a red nose, wearing a dressing gown and with galoshes on his bare feet, stood in the anteroom. On seeing Pierre he muttered something angrily and went away along the passage. He was a very clever man but has now grown quite feeble, as your honor sees, said Gerasim. Will you step into the study? Pierre nodded. As it was sealed up so it has remained, but Sofia Danilovna gave orders that if anyone should come from you they were to have the books. Pierre went into that gloomy study which he had entered with such trepidation in his benefactor's lifetime. The room, dusty and untouched since the death of Joseph Bazdiv, was now even gloomier. Gerasim opened one of the shutters and left the room on tiptoe. Pierre went round the study, approached the cupboard in which the manuscripts were kept, and took out what had once been one of the most important, the Holy of Holies of the order. This was the authentic Scotch axe with Bazdiv's notes and explanations. He sat down at the dusty writing table, and, having laid the manuscripts before him, opened them out, closed them, finally pushed them away, and resting his head on his hands sank into meditation. Gerasim looked cautiously into the study several times and saw Pierre always sitting in the same attitude. More than 2 hours passed and Gerasim took the liberty of making a slight noise at the door to attract his attention, but Pierre did not hear him. "Is the cabman to be discharged, your honor?" "Oh yes," said Pierre, rousing himself and rising hurriedly. "Look here," he added, taking Gerasim by a button of his coat and looking down at the old man with moist, shining, and ecstatic eyes. "I say, do you know that there is going to be a battle tomorrow?" "We heard so," replied the man. "I beg you not to tell anyone who I am, and to do what I ask you." "Yes, your excellency," replied Gerasim. "Will you have something to eat?" "No, but I want something else." "I want peasant clothes and a pistol," said Pierre, unexpectedly blushing. "Yes, your excellency," said Gerasim after thinking for a moment. All the rest of that day Pierre spent alone in his benefactor's study, and Gerasim heard him pacing restlessly from one corner to another and talking to himself. And he spent the night on a bed made up for him there. Gerasim, being a servant who in his time had seen many strange things, accepted Pierre's taking up his residence in the house without surprise, and seemed pleased to have someone to wait on. That same evening, without even asking himself what they were wanted for, he procured a coachman's coat and cap for Pierre, and promised to get him the pistol next day. Makar Alexievich came twice that evening shuffling along in his galoshes as far as the door and stopped and looked ingratiatingly at Pierre. But as soon as Pierre turned toward him he wrapped his dressing gown around him with a shamefaced and angry look and hurried away. It was when Pierre, wearing the coachman's coat which Gerasim had procured for him and had disinfected by steam, was on his way with the old man to buy the pistol at the Sukharov market that he met the Rostovs.